Para lo yura so que boda, omonia la guana como maqueñirawo. Oh, Paraguayo.
Well, based on what I've learned here in the United States, I thought Cuba was this place where, this dictatorship, where everyone where everyone, they're upset with their government, and so on. So I had that in the back of my mind when I first went to Cuba. But when I actually got there, it was different. The people there were happy. They actually, guys like Che or Fidel, those guys, they're considered as heroes.
So it was real cool to learn about Obsession and all the things they accomplished in Cuba, because me as a hip-hop fanatic, I love the influence that hip-hop can have. I feel like hip-hop has always been at the core of any social movement or just the arts in general, but it's not always as accepted to rap about stuff with a social and political message within your music, because people want to turn up, people want to get entertained, they don't want to hear that. And it's really hard to do in America, so I can only imagine it's 5 times harder to do in Cuba. It's a lot of things they can't talk about because of the government. And just them alone talking about pretty much black empowerment, loving yourself, loving your hairstyle the way it is, it just can be rubbed off wrong by the government, because they think in Cuba it's no one's white, no one's black, we're all Cuban. So if someone were to say, okay, we're going to make this music to promote black empowerment, that comes off as a bit like anti-Cuban. Like they said, they told us themselves they have a hard time getting radio play because they know certain DJs won't play that because it'll get them in trouble.
No lo mereces. Sigue quemándote el cráneo, deja que pasen 2 meses. La verdad en forma de raíces aparece
Being
siempre.
black in Cuba felt real cool. Felt like I was celebrated in a way, definitely by the Afro-Cubans. We were just in a mix of like, you black, I'm black, we family, you know what I mean? And that was probably the most liberating aspect of it, because I was literally not in America. Like, these weren't African Americans that I was connecting with, these are Afro-Cubans that I'm connecting with, and that's something beautiful because we're everywhere.
If you look black, or your hair waves, or you have even a slight tan, you're black in America. At the end of the day, you're still black because of the one drop rule. In Cuba, they define blackness very differently. To be black means to be black, and to be mixed means to be mixed. So you don't really have the same concepts where people would throw like a Halle Berry or Mariah Carey or Beyonce and say, oh, she's the example of black women, because those women are not black in Cuba, those women are mulattoes. Actually, I was told if I cut my hair and I shaved my beard, then I would be what is considered a habal, which is a step, quote unquote, above being mulatto, because in their society, much like in our society, the closer you are to being white, the more chance you have of being successful.
We were able to go into different buildings that the Afro-Cubans living in Cuba weren't allowed to go into, because I think of our American status. And I think when they hear American, they think of the possible, monetary contributions that we can provide. So I think that kind of put us at the forefront.
One last thing that was told to us by Obsession, one of the hip-hop groups in Cuba, was that as African Americans, we should take advantage of this sort of privilege that we have, this power that we have to stand up for ourselves and to be proud of who we are and who we've come from, so that we can empower other people throughout the diaspora to do the same.
The embargo has been in place since the 1960s, so basically for about 50 years. And the embargo is very encompassing. It's very wide range. And it has to do with financial constraints. Cuba can't use the US dollar. It has to do with trade limitations. Cuba can't export anything to the United States. US only exports food to Cuba, and it has to be paid in cash. So there's practically no trade. There's practically no investment from the U.S. And the only thing that Obama actually affected or changed was the travel regulations.
In the process of fundraising for the trip, I would ask relatives to send me money, and some of the relatives chose to send the money via PayPal. Small amounts, one was $35, the other was $50, and in the message they put, have fun in Cuba, or for your Cuba trip. And those monies were held up for upwards of, the minimum was 72 hours, and the longest it took for me to get money back was like 10 days. I had to email PayPal several times, and then every time I emailed them with one thing, they asked for an update. So at one point they asked what the trip was for. I said study abroad. Then they asked who's the trip with. I said FAMU. Then they asked for an itinerary of what we were doing while we were on the trip. And in my research, I learned that even if you were to say go to a Cuban restaurant and say for the Cuban food, you run the risk of the government locking that transaction and looking into see what happened and why you made that transaction.
So the service project that we did while we were in Kansas, it was a good experience. It was a very good time because we had a chance to clean up their neighborhood, being that they did have a litter problem, a problem with the litter, and that kind of stopped the kids in the neighborhood from having a safe place to play. There was a lot of glass and trash and just other unsafe things around that the kids could probably step on or fall on if they were playing a little more rough. Although there was a language barrier between us, that didn't really stop the connection between us and them. So yeah, I really enjoyed everything about that experience and that day in Matanzas.
Hola, Wiki, Wiki.
You see yourself?
Whiskey.
It's a video.
La prefiere compartida y esto se comprende bien. Muy breve explicaba él.
Being there and being able to see how socialism operates was really cool to me. For example, we went to see an environmentalist and he was talking about their agricultural infrastructure and how it's basically outdated and it's not as efficient as it needs to be. And I said, well, why doesn't the government just spend the money to update it? And so, you know, you'll be able to have more food produced because they're kind of they'll soon be experiencing a food shortage, she was saying. And I was like, okay, well, why doesn't the government just spend the money to fix it? And he said, well, there they prioritize things differently. So in America, for example, we have to pay for health care. It's seen as more of a privilege versus a right. And, you know, we have a lot of homeless people here. We can see in America how it's more about making the money versus there it's about the people and about, you know, it being equal for everyone.
So the day that we were learning about the agriculture and the environment of Cuba, I was literally sick.
Currently in the Cuban hospital because I don't feel good. I have a cough, scratchy throat, and they just took my blood. I'm feeling better because I get on the breathing thing. Some breathing is a little bit better.
Now, the ironic part about all that is that he was talking about the reason for the bad air, the bad, like the pollution and all, because of the old vintage cars, the very dope looking cars that everyone wants to take pictures in and of and all that stuff. They are actually ruining the air of Cuba, actually, and he said that himself. I actually had a personal experience with that because not only because of the climate change, of course, but the environment there, it messed up my health in the way of that my bronchioles got inflamed.
So this right here is a necklace which symbolizes a legua. And a legua is an Orisha in the Santeria religion or tradition. And what he's known for, he's always presented first in any ceremony. And he's known to have a childlike childlike mentality, always playing jokes on people, but also is known for being the communicator. So he's not. That's the reason he's first, because before any of the other Orishas are presented or doing their dances, that they have to communicate with the Alegua. And I actually got this while I went through a process right when we got off the port. I forget the name of the city, but we got off the port and they had a bunch of practitioners of the religion, and they gave us quick little readings. It wasn't like a full initiation or anything, but just a quick reading based off of our spirit and the energy we were giving out to them. And it was beautiful, because I learned a lot of things I knew about myself, but they just said it in a way where it resonated a little different. You know how like you're talking to somebody and they just say something, you're like, you know?
I kind of regret not getting a reading, because I was doing reading on like the different divine spirits that manifest themselves, but are in connection with the different colors and the beads, and it's really beautiful. I feel like that's an experience I could have got to learn something about myself, because it did look really powerful watching the others.
I had only read about what Santeria was, but when we got there, we actually went inside of a shrine and saw some of the animals they sacrificed for some of those gods. And so, though I did not participate, but I did see with my own eyes something that I read in a book.
If you want to find yourself, especially being from somebody of African descent, and seeing your roots and seeing how living in America works for you, and living in Cuba and seeing the totally different dynamics and systems and everything, it will open your eyes to things that you would not know are out there. And we think that America is a land of opportunity and everything, and it kind of is, but you'll truly understand, truly be able to grasp your opportunity here in America.
Ambalamba, 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 ilebelebe, ambalamba.